Welcome to Interchange, a conversation about music and liturgy and all the in-between spaces on the journey. I'm your host, Kate Williams. On today's episode, I'm honored to be joined by Bob Bordone, who is one of the founders of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute in Boston. And Bob and I first met because we have a connection with the Paulist communities of the Paulist Fathers, and we met at a polarization conference in Vegas. And I met him there in his full-time capacity as one who coaches people about how to have negotiations. So I mentioned to Bob, welcome Bob, by the way.
Hey, it's so great to be here, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this.
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad you said yes. Thank you for saying yes. I mentioned to Bob that one thing that music directors come to GIA with or come to the social media spaces with is often a question about the relationship between the music director and the pastor, music director and clergy in general. And it's one that can be quite fraught. I'm sure I don't have to remind listeners about all of the ways in which that might be true. But your expertise is in helping people negotiate conflicts and come up with some kind of resolution. In fact, it says right on the front page of your website that the aim is to foster a culture of conflict resilience where individuals and leaders listen deeply and assert authentically. Oh my gosh. Lofty.
Oh, what?
Can we do it, Bob? Can we do this?
Well, that is very aspirational for sure.
Yeah.
But that is the goal, right? That is the goal. And I think, I just finished a manuscript on this idea of conflict resilience that's going to be published actually as a book in March. And, one of the themes I think of my work is trying to reframe how people think about conflict. And I think my experience has been as a Catholic, but also as a Christian more broadly, because I've been very blessed to work in both Catholic communities and also non-Catholic Christian communities around conflict issues, that we in particular have a pretty unhealthy way of thinking about conflict. Because there's something in the Christian DNA that says conflict is bad, like bad people end up in conflict. And so somehow I need to be nice and generous and kind. And if I'm not nice and generous and kind, then I'm bad. But that's actually, I think, both an inaccurate understanding of Christianity, an accurate understanding of Jesus, an inaccurate understanding of humanity,
Yeah.
and an inaccurate labeling of what's good or bad, because actually conflict is part of the church,
Yeah.
is part of life, and is actually a gift.
Yeah.
For me, right, the challenge is like, how do you, as an individual, kind of embrace conflict and then handle it? And this is why I use the word resilient, right? In a resilient and healthy way.
Yeah. The story of Jesus flipping the tables of the money changers at the temple comes to mind as there are times when it's appropriate, when Jesus definitely did not shy away from the conflict that he needed to address. I'm curious I'm going to back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
How did you come into this work of conflict resilience? And especially because, we met within a Catholic context, like how did you come into this kind of Venn diagram of conflict resilience and the church?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, without giving you a whole life history, a very condensed version,
Sure.
really has been, I think my interest in conflict started in law school. I was someone who I went to law school, I would say one of the many purpose-free law students.
Okay.
When I say purpose-free, meaning that someone told you to be a good idea.
Yeah.
You got in and there you were.
Yeah.
And, but in my second year of law school, I had the fortune of taking a negotiation class that was at a program. One of the founders was a guy by the name of Roger Fisher. So Roger Fisher, some of your listeners, probably most wouldn't know who he is, but some might recognize him, or maybe the most famous book that he wrote, which is called Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In. And he founded the Harvard program on negotiation. And he was somebody who served in World War II. He actually interrupted his own studies at Harvard to serve in World War II. And when he returned, he discovered that all of his roommates were dead. They had all died.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so he committed himself to a career exploring and promoting and researching and writing and teaching about the nonviolent resolution of conflict. And one of his deep core beliefs was that any violent conflict is at heart, at core, a failure of our own empathy, our failure of our own ability to imagine the perspective of the other and what the world looks like.
Mm,
And so he's a very compelling person, a very inspirational person. And I got involved in this program. And, it was very consistent with, I think, my own values and the things that I loved most about Catholicism. I was a cradle Catholic, and I would say a dutiful Catholic in terms of rules, regulations, and doctrines. But I think the thing that always moved my heart was much more about that ability to see the dignity of each individual
mm,
and humanity is something that I wish I could do actually, but certainly felt aspirational. And there was something very consistent, I think, with the kind of ethos at the time of the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School and this guy, Roger Fisher, and my own kind of values and hopes as a Catholic Christian.
mhm,
And so I was very fortunate after graduating and serving as a law clerk to a federal judge to come back and start teaching negotiation at Harvard Law School. And I did that for 2 decades. And during that time, really started to notice a shift that I think many of your listeners might recognize in our culture,
mm,
which is a reduced capacity to handle conflict well,
mhm, mm,
meaning that we tend to find our cocoons of comfort, our people, and it's really easy to do with social media, with cable news, right? And avoid really and just demonize. Or in the alternative, when we do engage, it's a zero sum battle. And that observation I found to be deeply troubling and was related to negotiation and conflict resolution, but I think also different because quite apart from whether we have the skill to handle conflict, we also actually have to have the willingness to engage it, the resilience to sit with the discomfort of our disagreement. And that was the thing I was trying to address more recently in my work, which I think, to bring it back to things around pastors and music and directors, right? I think
yeah,
is, I think, very real, right?
yeah,
And it's made much more complicated when there's an idea that if I name this difference and address this in some way, then it means something's gone wrong.
yeah,
Somebody is wrong.
yeah. And I think what a lot of our listeners might resonate with too, if they're a music director, is like the, I think, unique from other jobs, the power dynamic between a clergy member and a layperson always holds in it this tension of, for the layperson, I could lose my job and have nothing and not have, a system that will make sure that I'll land somewhere on my feet?
I think that's exactly right for a whole bunch of structural reasons, right? First of all, my own sense, having gotten to do a lot of work with pastors and in parishes and dioceses, is that, first of all, plenary authority tends to rest in a pastor in a way that is very different from most employment situations.
Mhm.
It's often the case that, we use this term in negotiation called BATNA or best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And we say that it would be good to have a strong BATNA before you negotiate, meaning,
Mm.
and in most cases, that's the case, right? If I'm, I don't know, a nurse, like lots of hospitals, lots of doctor's offices are looking for nurses. I can't say I honestly know the music director market in any particular diocese,
Yeah.
but my guess is that the demand for music ministers is not so high and there's a much bigger supply. So the stakes of losing a position might be very consequential.
Mm.
My also guess is that there is an informal old boys network that someone's reputation could be easily sullied.
Yeah.
And so you could tell me that this is all wrong, Kate, but I can imagine all of those things add to the heightened challenge
Yeah.
in this relationship.
I think that's exactly right, actually. And I think that actually even being able to say that out loud is probably putting into practice something that we're talking about, right? Because if I, as a layperson, and this has happened too when I was a music director, if I would approach and name, perhaps I would even use the term old boys club, I wouldn't mean it as a slam, but I would mean it as this is one of the things that makes it complicated for me to truly voice my opinion here because
Yeah.
I feel shut out. But often it's received as just a like a slam and it almost like further puts me outside the circle of influence, you know?
Yes. Yes. And I think what's really interesting also, and of course, this does not apply to every pastor,
Of course, yeah.
but in many cases, pastors get their positions not because they have successfully completed an MBA and are skillful managers. So they're suddenly put in a management role. Most priests that I know did not become a priest because they wanted to be a manager.
Yeah.
The training is woefully inadequate. Now, there are resources, like I do work with a wonderful organization called Leadership Roundtable
Mhm.
that tries to, as best they can, offer leadership training to priests who are becoming pastors.
Mhm.
But most of the time, you have somebody who has they're not bad, they just don't have any managerial experience,
Mhm.
and yet they've been given plenary authority. And, there's a term one of my colleagues who teaches at Harvard Business School, her name is Amy Edmondson, and she's done a lot of research on something called creating psychological safety,
Yes.
right? And
Oh,
psychological
yes.
safety is this ability to create a space where disagreement, different views are actually and genuinely welcome and encouraged, and where it's more than just something you say, but there's a whole bunch of things you need to do and show and demonstrate. And that often isn't in place. In fact, the leadership culture, I think from seminary on upward to a chancery office is, I mean, highly hierarchical.
Yeah.
That is the nature of it.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily places of psychological safety.
Yeah.
And so it's just another challenge that I think is faced in a particular way, probably in a parish environment.
Yeah. I also don't mean to reduce anything down to a stereotyped way of talking about it, but it does feel like a lot of what we hear from music directors is that people who are very agreeable, we might call them yes father people,
Yeah.
have a lot more success maintaining a position or maintaining proximity to the leadership that they, desire. And people who are, I went to graduate school at Catholic Theological Union. And so I was in these situations a lot where, in fact, of course, in an academic environment, that's encouraged, right? To have freedom of expressing your ideas and figuring out which ideas kind of float to the top and the places where you can agree on things and the great places where you can grow based on different experience. That doesn't play out well after grad school in
Right.
the place. It's almost like there's also seems to be a very high level, and maybe this is on both sides, but a very high level of insecurity of self.
Mhm.
And so some of
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
plays out in the interactions around the table of the staff meeting. And, God forbid, but of course this leaks out to the wider parish as well, right? When the dynamics on staff are not so good.
Not so good. Yeah. Well, and I think again, like, I mean, maybe from my lens on this, right, is how do you match the leadership style needed to the context?
Mhm.
And I don't think there's a lot of good matching, frankly, in church environments. And, an analogy, right, is the military, right? Military is also a hierarchical and command control structure,
Yeah.
but the US military has spent millions of dollars investing in really thoughtful training on how do you do best practices around creating psychological safety? How do you, in the right context, set up an environment where you need to have an environment where there could be dissent in order to make really good decisions?
Yeah.
You know, take another example, right? I mean, if you look at the examples where, so not to get overly boring to your
No.
audience, but what we look at decision rules, right? And one decision rule might be majority rule. Another decision rule might be unanimity. And another decision rule is what we would call chair decides, right?
Yeah.
So one person decides. And in a hierarchical situation, in military situations, like one person may make a decision. Another example, right, is the executive branch, right? In the executive branch of the government, the 27 members of the cabinet might say do Y, but doesn't really matter. It's not a vote.
Mm.
It's what the president's. But skillful leaders, so if you ever have the opportunity to read President Obama's autobiography, he talks about how he would consciously try to set decisional meetings at times where he could take himself out of it, knowing that he was the decision maker, to allow a robust conversation and debate, because he knew that that would better inform his decision making. And at the risk of perhaps offending some of your listeners, and without meaning to be political, but just looking at leadership style,
Mhm.
President Trump had a very different way of running a cabinet meeting,
Mhm.
which was basically, you should agree with me. Otherwise, it was not going to go down well for you, right? Well, for optimal decision making, you really want that former environment where you're getting the best thinking from your people.
Yeah.
But to what extent? So parishes, in many ways, our chair decides, right? I'm on the pastoral council of my particular parish. That is advisory. We
Yeah.
are advisory. We are not the legislature.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter. A- and so what is the environment that particular leader is setting to get the best ideas? Or do they want a set of cheerleaders?
Yeah.
Now, there are times when, for better or worse, you need relatively quick command control thinking.
Yep.
Richard Hackman, who is a psychology professor at Harvard, has done some work looking at flight crews.
Mm.
And in most situations, collaborative decision making on flight crews is really good. In an emergency situation, you do need to have some relatively quick command control, because now you have to have the ability to make it, like the center, to be able to say, I think this is a critical error, sir.
Mhm.
But you can't set up a process where, as the plane is going down, we're talking through 52 choices and what are people's interests, and the plane will go down, right?
Mhm.
You've got to rely on people knowing what their job is and executing orders. All this is to say, this is like so boring now to your audience.
No,
It's
not at
how
all.
do we train our leadership to set up the right kinds of environments to make optimal the kinds of decisions you need to make? And if you are a pastor hiring a director of music, a director of family religious education, whatever, COO, whatever they would call the, businessman. The reason why I'm hiring these people, presumably, is that they have some expertise in their domain. I should be able and willing, and in fact, want to defer to that expertise.
Mhm.
And I should be able to set some clear parameters of what my expectations are and hopes are. I should be motivating them, creating an environment where folks can speak freely.
Mhm.
I just don't think that happens all that much.
Yeah. Yeah. The question that keeps popping up for me is I'm totally following your logic. I love it. I think that I'm going to dive into some of these references that you've already made. But the question for me is like, and maybe even in your experience, you have an answer for this, but like, how possible is it for leaders to change their way of being? Like, how often does that work when they meet a coach like you and they put their whole staff through this experience of learning how to work better together? How often does that work? And
Yeah,
do you have hope for everyone?
great question. So I would say I have hope for everyone.
Okay.
I would say a few things to that. One, I do have hope for everyone, with one caveat, right? That there has to be some genuine interest and willingness.
Yeah.
Um, and a check the box approach,
Mm.
did it so I'd say I did it, is not going to happen. Once we're in the set of people who want to do something, I have hope. Now, let me just be clear about what I mean by that, right? I think this is not unlike any set of human qualities, whether it's playing the piano, um, singing, playing tennis,
Mhm.
being a gymnast, right? Guess what? Bob Bordone is not going to be Simone Biles. And he's not going to be Serena Williams, right? Well, why? Like, well, these are people who have a tremendous amount of natural talent
Mm,
that I will never have
mm,
in either of those domains,
mm.
or I will never be a Kate Williams on piano or
Aw.
singing, right? Because I don't have that talent. Having said that, like if I had Kate as an instructor and I learned a lot about music and I practiced with reflection and intensity and I received some coaching from you, I would improve.
Mm.
It would still never let me play in the church, but I'd improve,
You don't know
right?
that, Bob.
Well, I don't know that, but maybe like at an emergency in the middle of summer, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, I think it's the same with this skill set. Do I think like every single pastor has it in him, or if it's not Catholic, her
Yeah.
to like be an amazingly like skillful leader who brings out differences and handles conflict with great skill? No, I think no.
Yeah.
I think people can improve from where they are for sure,
Yeah.
right? You have to think it matters enough and that they're willing to put in the time and energy. And I think this is where maybe I could fall victim to self-serving biases. But I would say this skill is so central and critical to effective parish management. I mean, I know that this is just for music directors, but it is for your entire staff.
Yeah.
It's how you deal with your parishioners. It's, I mean, honestly, in some ways, like how do you deal with anyone you're coming in contact with in the community, local leaders, other faith communities in your community?
Mhm.
And so if you're not willing to invest some time, energy, and effort into this,
Yeah.
it's a little hard to know how you could be a really great leader.
Yeah. It feels like for musicians, music directors, volunteers, there's like there's a really easy metaphor to make about, this kind of conflict and resolution analogy here because like everyone's favorite pieces of music have some level of tension and discord in them, which makes it
Mhm.
a fun ride to be on
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
experience those moments of tension and then release or resolve. That's what makes it interesting. That's what keeps your attention. That's what kind of stirs up emotions in you when
Uh,
people talk about music being an emotional experience. And we expect that to be a part of our engagement with music. There will be moments of tension and moments of release. And yet, like you were saying earlier, when we experience that in our daily life, whether it's on the staff or in our family or whatever, those moments of tension are treated as though they are bad. And it's like
yeah.
all we want is the moment of harmony 100% of the time. And I'm just wondering about like if there's something to be learned here from our own profession that we know and love, and what might be like, kind of a cool way if there is a staff that's willing and able to sit at table and be attentive to this, what might be a cool way to bring music and that joy of musical experience and expression into that conversation as a way of helping people like embody it, like put it into practice in kind of a real time. Sometimes it feels like that work of music is so close to sacrament because it's this tangible, embodied, there's an immediacy about it. It's doing like it's resonating through you. It's doing something to you that would take you without music, it would take you much longer and much more energy to do.
Yeah. I love that. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I really do, right? I mean, it's not something that I've thought about, but it does feel true,
Yeah.
in a way, like when I'm listening to you, it's like the music is awakening a whole bunch of cells,
Yeah.
right? That are beyond a cognitive, but a kind of emotional and identity based, almost like a historical time base. And all of those cells help like inform how we put ourselves forward.
That's right.
And part of like, in my mind, the work of being conflict resilient is awakening those to your own self, those cells,
Oh, yeah.
and then finding a way to give voice to that,
Yeah.
but give voice to that in a way that is authentic, but also maximizes the chances that the other can hear you.
Yeah.
what I hear you saying, and I think feels totally right to me, is music has a real capacity to contribute to that.
I think it really does. 'Cause even as I'm listening to you now talk about awakening cells, like I'm reminded of the really close connections that have just been there's been research poured into this and it continues to go, but the close connection between music and memory and how, anytime you sing a song, you are also remembering oftentimes very vividly that first experience that you had with the piece. Like if I
Totally.
were to sing to you, like
Yeah.
you without me even saying words, you know what season it is, you know other places that you've heard that melody. So it not only does it have this ability to bring the past, memories, legacy, tradition right to this present
Yeah.
moment, but also in a way that I think propels us to dream about where it might go next.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the part that I love about music, and especially music in the liturgy, is that it's an all times come together. And
Yes.
music really helps us to do that. But that is feels so distant to me from a staff meeting.
Right,
But
right, right,
and maybe for reasons that are valid, but also like need it be that distant from our parish staff meetings?
right, right. Well, and also part of it, right, is how do you, in my mind, I mean, how do you make parish staff meetings more alive?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, for sure, I'm imagining, right, that part of parish staff meetings is logistical coordination.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this could contribute to logistical coordination too.
Yeah.
But you also hope and imagine that part of parish staff meetings are how do we support each other? How do we pray for and vision how we can accompany the members of our community to deeper faith, to greater social justice in their community, to more lively prayer. And that work is not logistic. And if all they're doing is working through logistics and budgets and tasks, it's hard to imagine that being like the way to lead. Like it's hard to imagine that's what, for example, the early Christian communities in Acts spent most of their time on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I
Uh,
was just talking about Acts actually with a friend last night about like, wow, we just like we really have not evolved. When you think about Acts of the Apostles, like I just feel so distant, but not in an evolved way from that
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah,
passion about being a part of this thing we call Christianity.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I just am wondering, like, this seems I know it seems so Pollyanna-ish, and yet, like, I wanna conduct an experiment about, like, what if every staff meeting began or ended with either, like, a collectively recited prayer or sung prayer? Because I do think there's something magical that's happening, and I don't have the words for it, but it's very close to sacrament. There's some
yeah.
kind of encounter that's happening when we're doing this singing thing, and it sounds maybe it sounds, yeah, Pollyanna-ish, and yet I believe it because I've seen it happen, I've felt it happen.
Yeah. And, anyone who's been, just in a liturgy with really good music, right? It is evocative. I mean,
Yeah,
we know that people choose I personally don't go to my local parish
yeah,
for a particular reason. One of them is the liturgy of music, right?
yeah,
So it's interesting to think about an experiment, right? Like what would it be to just, as you said, start a meeting with sung prayer and then just ask people like, what did it evoke that you would want to bring into this meeting
yeah,
or that you think would like help us as we engage whatever we're engaging today?
yeah.
It
Yeah,
could be one word, just, so it doesn't go on for hours,
that's right, yeah. But it does make you listen to each other, which is another thing I think you already said. It doesn't happen enough.
Yeah.
We're not really listening to each other.
Yeah. I mean, if we're listening to respond,
Yeah,
to not listening.
right. When I was a music director myself, I didn't really have the opportunity to do this, but as a leader at GIA, leader of my editorial department, I really like experimenting with what is going to like And my staff is too big now to just do like a run down the line of people. What are you working on? What are you working on? What are you working on? And also, that's no fun. And I
Yeah.
don't know that really helps us do our job. But one thing I like to do, especially if there's a new person added to the mix, is just the whole meeting is just like, tell me why you do this work. And
Mhm.
it's been really edifying for me. It really has been fulfilling for me to be reminded through all of these different voices and perspectives about how they care about their contribution. And when you hear it articulated from all these different angles, you hear, like the metaphor of a boat. Like we're all in a boat, we're all rowing in the same direction. Like each of us has a different row here,
Yeah.
but we're going the same way for some like greater purpose. And you can put your updates about what you're working on, like you put that in the chat later. And I also, in my experience of working in just a few parishes around here in the diocese, is like there's also not enough of that. But what if there was? And what if there was more of like from all the various leaders, employed, volunteer, and otherwise, if you just had like check-ins to be like, why are you still here? Like you could be doing a lot of things with your life, but you're choosing to do this thing with your life. And why are you doing that?
Yeah, I love that.
I keep trying to like tell me if this is right or not. But I keep trying to make these opportunities because I think not everything is conflict or tension, but we have to have like 100 other good experiences with one another so that when a bad experience or a moment of conflict comes along, we can trust each other enough to know that we just disagree. Like we're going to get through this.
100%, right? Like part of the goal is, how do you build real relationships that are more than one mistake deep?
Yes.
And part of, whenever I meet like a new couple or something and they'd be like, we haven't fought. I'm like, how long have we been dating? And if it's like more than like 4 or 5 months, I'm like, if you haven't fought, like, I'm not celebrating you.
Wow. Yeah.
Like someone is not saying something that needs to be said. I mean, of
Yeah.
course, you don't want to be fighting all the time. That's also not a good
Yeah.
thing. But I think part of what you're talking about, which I think is, there's so many different angles our conversation could have gone, but is somehow we've gone down this, like, how do we create, I guess, maybe the dimension of psychological safety.
When there's trust in the room, we can breathe. When we don't undercut or deceive. When there's grace in the air and respect everywhere. When there's trust in
how do we create a climate by a set of important micro moves we might make in the way we run a meeting, in the way we set up space that allows for difference to come in the room. And the prerequisite to that, in some sense, is creating a sense of shared mission, a sense of interpersonal trust.
Mm.
I always say the mark of a good the mark of a good relationship is not that we get along, but that we actually manages our differences well, right? If we're both Yankees fans, okay, nice. But if you're a Red Sox fan and I'm a Yankees fan, and we could work that out,
Yeah.
that's cool. I mean, I'm using a pretty simplistic example here, but you know what
No, that sounds like it would be miraculous. I think we should see if that can
Right.
work.
Right. The thing also, even the thing about like running a meeting, for many years, I ran a teaching team of 14,
Yeah.
where frankly, the decision role was also plenary. I decided. But one thing that I did is I never ran a meeting.
Mm.
Would rotate, someone on the team would run the meeting, they'd send the agenda around. We would do something ritualized, some kind of ritualized sharing of something. Maybe it was just like a rose and thorn for the week. Maybe it was what was one thing you observed on the way in that surprised you.
Yeah.
And I would have to raise my hand in the meeting. And those are, I mean, they sound tiny and they, in some ways, are tiny, but it forced me into a different role.
Yeah.
It also created a different kind of space. And I think what would it be interesting, and it was a way of sharing work, but what would it be for a parish staff to say, it's not the pastor who's running the meeting,
Yeah.
but someone else, and bring to the design of this something that you think would, maybe be part of what you're up to right now, or that you think would be special or important for the group. And so these kind of micro moves that we can make, I think, to provide some voice, some shared, I would say, operational control,
Mm-hmm.
and that might temper tendencies toward dictatorial decision making.
Yeah.
Or just a sense of, I mean, this is what was, I think, brilliant about some of the moves that you read in the Promised Land from Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, Obama cannot, or no president can or should say, I'm not the commander in chief. And we wouldn't want the president to say, well, I don't make the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
He hired you
Mm-hmm.
for the purpose of making the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But there are moves you can make to create different kinds of space to get ideas out.
Yep.
Which will never change. I mean, no one's going to ever be like, well, since he's not running the meeting, I guess President Obama's not in charge.
Right. Yeah.
Now he's in charge. He's in charge and he's going to make the decision.
It's so it's interesting to me that you would describe that as a micro move, because what I hear in that, especially because in the world of music and liturgy, is like we live in a world of symbolic language, and the symbol of not having to be in charge of every meeting or leading every meeting says so much about the many parts but one body metaphor that we hope to celebrate in church work, right? That's so smart. I feel like that, yeah, it is a micro move, and yet could have so much impact and really empower people to step up and contribute too. Like, we're all leaders around this table, and none of us is God at the end of the day. Yes,
Yeah.
there'll have to be a person who stands behind every decision that's made.
Yeah.
That's so
And
smart.
yeah, so maybe it's not a micro move, but there's a bunch of these kinds of what I would just say intentional design moves,
Yes.
right? That could create different kinds of space. And I would say transform how a parish works, right? And there's these kinds of tools. Another kind of tool that I would just share is what I call inform, consult, consensus build. And it's simply a way to say that every organization, right, has to make some decisions. And I think where a lot of tension on a staff can come is people not knowing how a particular issue is going to be worked out.
Yeah.
And so very clear indication from whether it's a leadership team or a particular leader to say, here are a set of domains, whether you agree with me or not, that are going to be in the informed bucket. Whatever, I'm just making this up. You can't wear a t-shirt and flip-flops. Work starts at 9 and ends at 5. We're not negotiating that.
Yeah.
Consult. here's a set of things where I genuinely want to know what people think. Or we as a leadership group genuinely want to know. It's for real. It's not just to make you feel good. Like we're really listening. And yet we will take that in and make a decision. And you know what that is. And then consensus build. We're going to work together to come to something we all can live with and get behind. Every organization, like one of the mistakes in my field is to think that consensus building is always the best thing. You know what consensus building means? There's a funny phrase, right? Always consult before deciding. But then the downside of that is what I call NGAD, never get anything done,
Yeah. I knew
right?
that's where it was going to go.
So there are some things that like we really just the nature of it is like we have to let the music director just decide like what the opening song on the 16th Sunday in ordinary time is. Like we just can't bring that to the parish
Yeah.
and like, consensus build it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
I don't think,
Oh, I
there's some things where to get full agreement might take such a long time, but we really want to get a sense of the community. And then there's some things where it's so core that we really have to all be behind it. Just my own experience, but more importantly, I guess the research has shown what people want is clarity about what is it this thing we're doing here? Like, does my opinion really matter or not? Are you consulting with me, but at the end of the day, you've already pre-decided. Just
Yeah.
letting people know, hey, this is an informed thing.
That's so interesting and relevant, I think, for us in the Catholic sphere because of these ongoing articles we're reading about the synodal process.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're consulting?
Well, it's hard to say. And I think it feels like I think this is part of what's tough, right? Is
Yeah.
I don't think there has been clarity.
Hey.
I think different dioceses and bishops have taken it quite differently. And there's a history, I think, of feeling let down before. Part of this, I mean, is I don't think that, now I'm going to make a statement is like your listeners will be like, this guy's really annoying. I think that the Holy Father has come from a place of real sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure there's been actual consultation with folks who do process design, who do the
Interesting.
kind of the work that my colleagues and I do.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of making it up as we go along. I'm not so sure it's been informed by research and best practices. I think the thing we have going for it, I still believe, is that the Spirit is guiding it.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, like, even if they did consult with experts, it's a worldwide, ginormous process. I mean, it's not exactly how do you decide what time the masses are going to be next Christmas?
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to this.
Big questions. Sometimes I wonder that about church work. Just when you mentioned best practices, and I wonder sometimes because we sometimes in our church spheres like to separate ourselves out from the rest of the world, and so sometimes best practices can be like, well, that might have worked for them in our history. I don't know if we're willing to really take those chances on best practices.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. But there hasn't been a real clarity. And I think there's been a lot of fear, right? I mean, there's been some way in which, right, the church is both trying to comfort what I would, for lack of a better word, would call more conservative Orthodox voices that, like, this is not a relitigation of the doctrine of the unchanging doctrine of the church, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also like a sense of, but the God is at work in this church and we need to be listening.
Yeah.
And we need to be listening particularly to the lived experience of the people of God, which, oh, by the way, is not just the bishops.
Yeah.
But what's tough about this, right, is that that's operating while there's this big kind of, I would just say, political sphere that, frankly, isn't entirely and arguably maybe mostly about the things of God, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I certainly, Kate, have had many people say to me, why do you stay Catholic?
Yeah.
And that's a good, hard question. But then part of it they'll say is, the church is whatever, so corrupt, it's done so much damage, it still does damage. And I agree. Like for me, part of it is show me the institution of which you're a member that operates flawlessly according to its principles.
Yeah.
I would like to join that one.
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know plenty. And by dint of humanity being involved, it is going to be political. As Christians, we might call things sinful.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that there's not goodness in the spirit in it.
Yeah.
And so I respect, and people have to go where they're called, right? But the fact of the political aspects is, at least not for me,
Yeah.
reasons for leaving.
Yeah.
But boy, we could do a lot better, right?
Well, we sure could. And when I think about this question for myself too, I think I wrestle with it. And then occasionally I come across a person like you who I wouldn't have met were it not for my continuing to wrestle with where I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to be in the world. I'm going to have you
Same.
back, Bob, as a recurring guest if you'll be with us for the opportunity, because we could have gone so many different directions with this conversation, but I'm just very happy to have at least opened the door a little bit. And I know that there are going to be people reacting to the idea of conflict resolution in our parish staffs. And we didn't even get into the liturgy really yet. So,
I would love that. This is so much
oh,
fun.
please do.
And
Yes.
I just loved how organic it was. And
Yeah.
so thank you,
Yeah.
Kate, so much for having me
Absolutely.
on.
Tell me the name of your book that's about to come out.
Yes, it's called Conflict Resilience: Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In.
Thanks,
Okay.
Bob. Have
Thanks,
a great
Kate.
day.
Okay. Yeah. Bye. You too.
Bye. This has been an incredible conversation with Bob Bordone. I am so grateful for his time here with us at the Interchange podcast. It's just incredible to be surrounded by people with so much insight and strategies for how we can continue to do this work to the best of our ability and do what we do to use music to make the world a little brighter. Let's seal this time together with a prayer. In our tradition, we begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, you are so good. Always so good. We thank you for this goodness, especially because we know that there will be times when we disagree. Even times when we are angry, sad, pained, longing for a moment of resolution. We praise you especially for these good times, for everything that informs us that indeed it will once again be good. And we thank you, of course, for the gift of one another, accompanying one another along the way of life, and that you, God, are always by our side, ever present, abiding with us through thick and thin. We bring all our prayers to you through your Son, Jesus, our companion on the journey. Amen. So there it is, another episode of Interchange. This exchange of ideas and experiences and hope-filled embrace of all that has been and all that might be, as we continue singing our lives back to God. Whether your congregation worships in person or online, One License has the licensing permissions you need. If you use copyrighted music in your worship services, consider an annual reprint and/or podcast streaming license with One License. We offer licensing options for all the ways you worship. Learn more at www.onelicense.net. This is Interchange, a podcast brought to you by GIA Publications. Send your wonderments to us at GIA and give us a follow so you're always part of the conversation.